Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm your host, Newsome, and we're here for UFC Vegas at 43, headlined by Ketlen Vieira versus Miesha Tate. And that's exactly where we're going to start with the breakdowns. It's a really good fight stylistically. The bookies are thinking it's going to be close. I agree that it's going to be a close fight as well. When you really break this fight down, both fighters are very, very even in every single area of MMA. So from a striking perspective, I actually think it's close. Again, I think Tate's the more technical striker for sure, but Vieira is definitely the more aggressive, the more powerful striker. So there's a contrast in the striking there. When you're looking at the wrestling of both fighters, I think Miesha Tate's the better wrestler, but then again, with Ketlen Vieira, she's a former Brazilian wrestling champion, so wrestling definitely comes very easy for her to be able to use inside the cage, get takedowns, get on top of her opponents. But like I say, I do think Tate has that wrestling edge. In regards to the grappling and the jiu-jitsu, this is where I think Vieira actually has the edge. I think she's the better grappler, but again, there's not too much in it because Miesha Tate's a good grappler herself. And this is why the fight is going to be really close. I think this is why it's lined really close as well. But the one problem that I have in this fight is from Vieira's perspective. I've got big question marks over her cardio. I actually didn't realize the cardio was that bad until I started studying this fight for 5 rounds, which again is really important. I think Vieira's got a good first round in her. She's got a decent second round in her. But from the third round and even the end of the second round, she does start slowing down. That's going to be bad news for her in this fight because Miesha Tate can fight 5 rounds. She doesn't have cardio issues, and if Vieira slows down in this fight, that's going to enable Miesha Tate to get her wrestling going a little bit more. She's going to be a little bit quicker to the punch from a striking perspective, and I think Tate's going to pull away with this fight the longer the fight goes on. From a finishing upside, I don't see or envisage a finish very likely happening. I think for Vieira, her path to victory is probably to get the finish because I think Tate's going to take the later rounds. If she takes one of the first 3 rounds, then that's going to mean that Tate's up on the scorecards, which means that Vieira would have had to have found a finish earlier in the fight. I don't think that finish happens. I'm picking Miesha Tate to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Chiesa versus Sean Brady. Sean Brady, a prospect I'm really high on. I'm glad that he's stepping up in competition and getting a fight that he deserves. I think anyone outside of Chiesa, I think at this moment in time, he probably runs through them as well. But I do actually think that this is a step up that's a little bit too much for Sean Brady. And one thing with Chiesa is wrestling and grappling is solid. And that's where Brady needs to be better than his opponents to really flourish in his fights. If Brady's wrestling is better and he can get the fight down to the mat, his topside jiu-jitsu is crushing. He's got ridiculous power on top as well. He's a fighter that can one-arm guillotine you, so that squeeze is really tight. And actually just flipping back to Brady's side, this is actually where I'm more concerned for Chiesa, because for as good as Chiesa is in his jiu-jitsu, the one issue that he's had is making slight mistakes on the mat that costs him the fight. Look at Vicente Luque last time out. Chiesa started that fight well, took Luque down. He was looking to smother him on top, and then he made one slight mistake. Luque finished him with a front choke, and that's where he's got to be careful here, because if Sean Brady gets Chiesa in a guillotine, it's going to be too tight of a squeeze. But outside of that, I think Chiesa's striking's improved enough for him to be able to be effective striking in this fight. And like I said, his wrestling and grappling is enough to prevent the offense of Sean Brady, an offense that Brady's going to need to win this fight. That's likely going to be the problem. I am picking Chiesa to win this fight. And in the next fight, a fight that's supposed to have happened a while ago, it didn't. I can't remember the reason why, but the UFC have rebooked it. We've got Yahya versus Kyung Kang. A really interesting fight. Yahya, from a skill set perspective, is the more skilled fighter, is the more technical fighter in my opinion. But Kyung Kang holds all the physical advantages, is the more athletic fighter, is the younger fighter, the faster moving fighter. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this fight. But ultimately, I just see Yahya being able to get takedowns in this fight. Yahya's never been the biggest fighter, the strongest fighter, ripped or shredded, but he's always had that ability to be able to get the fight down to the mat, and I think that's the case in this fight. Kyung Kang's definitely going to have moments on the feet, but Yahya will be able to score takedowns, in my opinion, throughout the fight. If he doesn't get the finish, topside, from a submission, in that first round, then I do think we'll see him get a takedown in the second round, maybe the third round as well. But the bottom line is I think that Yahya is going to be able to get takedowns enough in at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, to win 2 out of the 3 rounds on the scorecards. And obviously in that scenario, he wins the fight. But I think Rani Yahya's got a big submission finishing upside in this fight as well. So if he doesn't get the finish, I think he can win via takedowns and top control time on a judge's scorecard. But outside of that, I think that Rani Yahya's live to get a finish along the way. I'm picking Rani Yahya to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Joanne Wood, formerly Joanne Calderwood. She's dropped the Calder because she's married her coach, John Wood. So that's the reason for the name change. Joanne Calderwood versus Taila Santos. Now, the first thing I want to say about this betting line is I think it's absolutely crazy. There's no way that it should be this wide. Joanne Calderwood's sitting at around a plus 250 underdog with Taila Santos roughly around that minus 300 favourite range. And the line's too wide, but with that being said, I do understand why Taila Santos is favoured. I just don't think it should be that wide. Both fighters have got a Muay Thai style. Joanne Calderwood is slightly less offensive and less aggressive with that Muay Thai style, more of a volume. She can rack up high numbers of volume in a fight. She can pick up over 100 strikes in a fight as well. So that's something that she's got to try and implement in this fight. She's just got to try and throw. But it's going to be difficult because Taila Santos, although she's got a Muay Thai style, she's much more aggressive. She's a forward pressure, on the front foot, aggressive type of fighter where she'll look to land hard shots that hurt you and try to finish you. And then when you're looking from a wrestling perspective, we've seen in the past that Santos can wrestle. She can get her opponents down to the mat. She is decent topside as well. She can opponent out on top, run the clock down, win minutes in the rounds, and obviously therefore win the rounds and looking better on the judges' scorecards. So I think that Taila Santos has got multiple paths to victory here. She can take the fight down to the mat if she needs to, but on the feet, although it's going to be close at times, although Calderwood will rack up volume in this fight, I just think that the aggressive nature, the forward pressure and the hard shots of Taila Santos is going to be the difference maker in this fight. So like I said, I do think the betting lines are really, really wide. I don't think it's going to be a whitewash. I don't think Santos will look like a minus 300 favourite, but I do think she is going to win the fight. I'm picking Taila Santos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Adrian Yanez versus Davey Grant. This is again a really good fight. Davey Grant taking a step down in competition after fighting Marlon Vera. He performed well in that fight early on, but ultimately the level showed. Marlon Vera took over the fight, and by the time the fight was done, Davey Grant was very much beaten. So Davey Grant coming down from that big step up after 2 really big knockout wins. A step up he deserved, but now they meet in the middle with Adrian Yanez. Adrian Yanez on his way up. Adrian Yanez is a special fighter. He's a solid striker. He's got power, he's got speed, his movement, his combinations, sliding in and out of range, being able to fight on the back foot really well, nearly as well as he can fight on the front foot, which is a trait that not many fighters have. I think Adrian Yanez is absolutely a prospect in this sport. I think he's a fighter that everybody should be watching out for, and I think it's going to be a difficult fight for Davey Grant here. Davey Grant, for me, has got to get this fight down to the mat. He's got to try and get top side of Yanez, but so far, aside from Randy Costa, every single opponent inside the UFC has tried to take Adrian Yanez down, and he's got a 100% takedown defense. So his takedown defense is obviously on point. He has been taken down on the regional scene, but when he does get taken down, he doesn't play guard, he doesn't try and submit from bottom, he just gets right back up to his feet. So if Grant is able to take him down and score a couple of takedowns, I don't think he's going to be able to do too much with it from that point. I think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet, and that for me is where Adrian Yanez is going to absolutely light the cage on fire with the power, with the combinations, ripping to the body, to the head. It's difficult to see a legitimate, solid path to victory for Davey Grant. For that reason, I'm picking Adrian Yanez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tucker Lutz versus Pat Sabatini. A very interesting fight stylistically, both fighters with a wrestling background. Tucker Lutz wrestling from a young age, Pat Sabatini, a former Division 1 wrestler, I believe. Now, what's interesting with Pat Sabatini is, even though he has this wrestling background, his better work is actually done on the ground. He's a legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Daniel Gracie, and you can see that when he gets on top of his opponents. His transitions from position to position, he floats really well. It's solid, he's always in control, he looks for submission opportunities, and he is a nightmare to deal with and get off when he's on top of you. But the thing is with Tucker Lutz, and this is where the fight gets really interesting, is Tucker Lutz has got that wrestling background to be able to prevent Pat Sabatini from getting the fight down to the mat very easily, at least. Now, I'm not saying Sabatini can't score takedowns, but it's definitely going to be more difficult for him in this fight than it has been in previous fights. Tucker Lutz, obviously, you can see that wrestling background when he's defending takedowns. He's got a short, thick frame as well. Actually reminds me a lot of Jimmy Rivera in regards to his frame and the way he fights. That wrestling background, but he uses the wrestling more from a defensive perspective unless he has a very solid path to victory. If his opponent's got a hole in his wrestling, and Tucker Lutz will obviously look to his wrestling, but his striking is so clean, crisp and on point, and this is where I think he's going to cause a lot of problems for Pat Sabatini, because Pat Sabatini's striking I just don't think is as good as Tucker Lutz's, or anywhere close to being as good. Tucker Lutz does a good job with the lead left hand. He hits a check left hook if he's the one moving backwards. Otherwise, if he's moving forwards, he'll start combinations off with his lead left hook. He's got a solid straight right. He's got hard low kicks as well. And Pat Sabatini, we saw in the Jamal Emmers fight, his striking just isn't there yet in regards to be able to take in these other good, clean, crisp type boxers out like Tucker Lutz. Pat Sabatini will trade wildly in boxing range, and that's where he can get caught, and I think Tucker Lutz will be able to catch him with something hard. I'm not saying he's going to knock him out, but I do think he could wobble him, hurt him, maybe even drop him. Sabatini's got to get this fight down to the mat. Like I said, I don't think that you can say he's not going to get it down there, but Tucker Lutz has got the skill set, the traits, the abilities to be able to stop the offense of Pat Sabatini. And like I said earlier on with Chiesa and Sean Brady, it's an offense that Pat Sabatini needs in order to win the fight. Tucker Lutz is going to make it difficult. I think the fight's going to have some really solid moments on the feet, which should be enough to sway the judges. If there's not a finish, I am picking Tucker Lutz to win this fight. And in the next fight, another fun, well-matched fight, we've got Rafa Garcia versus Natan Levy. Both fighters are aggressive on the feet. Natan Levy likes to throw hard kicks to the body, to the head, whereas Rafa Garcia is definitely more boxing heavy. So a bit of a contrast on the feet in regards to the striking, because the ranges will dictate who actually has the more success in this fight. But the thing is, Natan Levy can throw hands as well. So I think Natan Levy's got the slight striking edge because he'll be able to strike from the outside with the kicks. And like I said, he's going to be able to do good work inside boxing range as well, even though he might not be the better boxer. He's going to be more comfortable at more ranges than Rafa Garcia. But the thing is here, both fighters are good wrestlers. Natan Levy looks to have a really good completion rate on his takedowns, multiple ways of getting fights down to the mat in regards to traditional wrestling, single legs, double legs, but getting body locks and tripping his opponents down. Rafa Garcia, on the other hand, again, good wrestling. I don't think it's quite as good from a completion rate as Natan Levy. Garcia normally has to drive through his opponent, put the backs to the cage and look to try and chain wrestle. So again, it's going to be really interesting to see who wins the wrestling battles. But once again, I think that slight edges with Natan Levy. I feel that if this fight does go deeper and you're looking at these wrestling exchanges, the grappling exchanges, and who's been on top in the top position more than their opponent, I think it's more than likely that Natan Levy is the fighter that's on top for longer periods of time opposed to Rafa Garcia. Rafa Garcia is probably a slightly more threat when it comes to a submission. But like I said, from a control perspective, from an accuracy with a takedown completion rate, I think that Natan Levy holds slight advantages there. As I've already mentioned, I think he holds a slight advantage in the striking. Even though he doesn't have as much experience as Rafa Garcia, and it could be one of those fights where Natan Levy's just bitten off a little bit more than he can chew. For this time, I am still picking Natan Levy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between Loma Lookboonmee and Lupita Godinez. And again, this is a really interesting fight. We've got a clash of styles here. We've got Lupita Godinez that's very aggressive on the feet, that likes to come forwards, get in the face of her opponents, land a ton of volume, power along the way with it. Then you've got Loma Lookboonmee, who is very much more calm, more composed. She's got an extensive Muay Thai background. She's fought so many times from a competitive Muay Thai perspective, trains with the Hickman brothers as well, so that tells you everything you need to know. She's a fighter that's more likely going to just be able to sit back, fight on the back foot, land volume, and just react and counter to the reckless wildness of the striking of Godinez, if that makes sense. So I think that Godinez is going to come forwards and try and be in her face, but Loma Lookboonmee, it's not going to be anything she hasn't seen before. I think she'll be able to react and deal with that effectively. Loma Lookboonmee also has those foot sweeps as well, the foot sweep takedowns, where she's not necessarily willing to follow her opponent down there, but if things get a bit too heavy, if the aggression and the pressure is a bit too much, she can just quickly clinch up, foot sweep, get her opponent down, back off, reset. I like that aspect of the game as well. The one area where Godinez will have success though, if she goes to it relentlessly, is with her wrestling. But again, Loma Lookboonmee, for as good as she is as a striker, she's no slouch on the mat. She knows how to wrestle, she knows how to defend takedowns, and if she does get taken down, she's not a guard player. She won't try and submit you from her back, she'll try and stand right back up to her feet. I think the majority of this fight plays out in the striking department. That's where I see the fight being won and lost. And although Loma Lookboonmee to the eye might look like she's in trouble, constantly moving backwards, I think she's going to be the more effective fighter moving backwards. Effective striker and will win a round, will win the fight. I'm picking Loma Lookboonmee to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Terrance McKinney versus Firas Ziam. And again, we've got a contrast in styles here because Terrance McKinney, listen, McKinney's a fun fighter to watch, super entertaining, never in a boring fight. He's a ball of energy. He'll come forward fast, hard, aggressive. He's got power in his hands. He's got a wrestling background. He's a good scrambler as well on the mat. So from a grappling Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu perspective, he can be a nightmare to keep up with. I actually think that McKinney's got the finishing upside in this fight for sure. If any fighter is going to finish this fight, it's definitely more likely to be McKinney, in my opinion. But I think with Firas Ziam, Ziam's more of a controlled, calm, composed striker. He fights tall, he fights long, fights from the outside, striking in. And I think that after he's weathered that early storm from Terrance McKinney, if he's still in the fight, that is, I think once Ziam's got his reads in, once he's got his timing down, I think his effective striking from a technical standpoint is on a completely different level to McKinney's. I think that Ziam's going to be able to take over the fight, just slow things down, make things calmer, be able to pick his shots, and therefore the volume will pick up. And that will all add to the efficient, effective striking of Firas Ziam. Like I said, it is very possible that McKinney goes in there and takes Ziam out early, but if he doesn't, I do think Ziam pulls away with it the longer the fight goes on. I do think the fight's going to go a little bit longer this time out than what McKinney's used to, and for that reason, I'm picking Firas Ziam to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cody Durden versus Aori Qileng. And again, this is going to be another really good fight from a stylistic perspective. We've got both fighters that, you know, from a striking perspective, Aori Qileng is the more dangerous striker, is the fighter that's more aggressive, will come forward, throw hard punches. Not very technical. That's where we've sort of come over to Cody Durden. Cody Durden for me is the more technical striker, but like I say, just not quite as dangerous. But Cody Durden will rip to the body, to the head. He's also got some good low kicks as well. The low kicks are something that could really play a big factor in this fight if he gets off on them early and stays consistent with them as well. But then when, like I say, on the feet, I just think that Aori Qileng is going to be able to push Cody Durden backwards striking. So if this fight is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I would favour Aori Qileng. The problem is I don't think this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. Both fighters like to wrestle, they both like to grapple as well. So I do think we're going to see a lot of moments in this fight where each fighter is trying to clinch up with their opponent, get a dominant position on the cage, trying to look for a takedown. And that's where I think that Cody Durden's going to come out on top. I think Durden's the better wrestler. So although Aori Qileng will try, I think Durden will end up in the more dominant positions on the mat. And that's actually where Durden is best. And I think that's the biggest gap in skill in this fight on the mat in regards to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Cody Durden is a good grappler. He floats from position to position really well. He does a good job of passing guard, getting into half guard, side control, and he's got a very sneaky back take as well. He nearly always finds the back of his opponent. He just has that ability to take the back, and that's where he can start to look for a rear naked choke. So I think the longer the fight goes on, I think Cody Durden's got a finishing upside because, like I said, if he's finding that back and if he's getting into good submission positions on the mat, then he's going to have that position and that submission upside. But I think if he doesn't find a submission in this fight, the longer the fight goes on, I think Durden's just going to be able to win minutes of the rounds just by having good top control. And again, the striking on the feet, I don't think there's going to be too much in it, although I do think Aori Qileng will look better in the judges' eyes. I think the bigger moments are going to be on the ground. I think that's where the majority of the fight takes place. And for that reason, I'm picking Cody Durden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kyung Nordenbecker versus Sean Soriano. And I think this is a really good fight for Sean Soriano, if I'm being honest. Nordenbecker is a thick, stocky Chinese wrestler that will hunt for takedowns, look to try and get his fights down to the mat, take his opponents down. And at a certain level, Nordenbecker's really overwhelming for his opponents and is a lot to handle. But the thing is, Sean Soriano isn't a 3-6 fighter. He's not a 4-3 fighter. He's a UFC caliber fighter. And the difference between a UFC caliber fighter and the fighter that Nordenbecker's been controlling and dominating outside of the UFC, there's a big difference between that. Nordenbecker, he might be able to get a takedown or two in this fight. You know, he is relentless and he is a good wrestler. He does powerfully shoot into the legs of his opponents, lift them up and take them down. But the problem Nordenbecker has is his topside Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is just not that heavy. His opponents can stand back up to the feet again at a certain level. But Sean Soriano isn't at the level of a regional level fighter. He's a UFC caliber fighter, as I've mentioned already. He's going to be able to stand back up to his feet if he's taken down. And on the feet is where the biggest gap in skill is. Sean Soriano is a good striker, good movement, good power, puts combinations together. He finds the target. And more importantly here, he's going to be able to find the target on Nordenbecker, who doesn't have that much head movement. He does keep his head on the centre line. His movement isn't too great when he's absorbing pressure and absorbing strikes, and that's going to be a problem here. I think Sean Soriano is going to be able to get off on strikes. He's going to be able to crack Nordenbecker. He's going to make this fight really difficult for him. Nordenbecker's going to have moments where he's trying to take him down, but the longer this fight goes on, Nordenbecker's going to tire either from trying to wrestle too heavily because of his physique and how big and thick he actually is, or he'll tire from just getting hit in the face too much. Either way, Sean Soriano is live for a finish, but he's also live to win a decision on the scorecard should it go 3 rounds. I'm picking Sean Soriano to win this fight. And in the final fight of the breakdown, we've got Luana Pinheiro versus Sam Hughes, who's taken this fight on short notice. It should have been Pinheiro versus Jessica Penne. And I actually think this is a better fight for Pinheiro, a less complicated fight, a fighter that isn't, well, she's dropping a level, shall we say. You know, Sam Hughes, for me, isn't on the same level as Jessica Penne. But what Sam Hughes will do is she will give Pinheiro the fight she wants. Sam Hughes is predominantly a striker. She's not going to be trying to take Pinheiro down or cause problems, you know, trying to upset the rhythm of Pinheiro on the feet. Pinheiro is going to get a striking battle here for as long as she wants it. Inside boxing range, Pinheiro lands these wild, explosive punches that clearly do have power because we've seen her knock her opponents out. But then if things do get a little bit too much or Pinheiro wants to change it up inside of that boxing range, she can just close that distance that little bit further, get the takedowns and get the throws. Her judo is absolutely world class. Her hip tosses, she was ragging Randa Marcos around absolutely everywhere. Actually a fight that ended pretty strangely. I don't think Pinheiro was acting there. She was in full control of the fight. I think she just got hit with a hard illegal up kick that was enough to render her unable to continue. So I don't think there was anything there. I think it was just, it is what it is. I don't think she was acting, but Pinheiro was ragging Randa Marcos around. I think Randa Marcos is a much more competitive opponent than what Sam Hughes will be. We saw what she was doing to Marcos. I think she'll be able to replicate that, take it one step further and get a clear victory, whether that be a finish or whether that be a decision on the scorecards. But either way, I'm picking Luana Pinheiro to win this fight. And that's it for this week's podcast. Again, guys, I appreciate all the likes and subscriptions to the YouTube channel. We're growing week by week, and that's thanks to you guys. If I've ever helped you win a bet, win some money with my analysis or predictions, then please just drop a like or drop a subscription to the channel. Like I said, people are doing it more and more each week, and I really do appreciate that. Thank you. Remember, we are on a 1 week break next week. There is no UFC, therefore there'll be no podcast. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you after that 1 week break.